Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. In a recent video my hair was a bit of a bedhead brushback and I received mean comments about it. So I spent 10 seconds brushing my hair before clicking start recording. Are you happy now? Good. Here's an Acer Nitro laptop that doesn't turn on. Apparently it has no power at all. So I'm not going to plug it in for now because technically I shouldn't plug stuff in before I look at it. The reality is the customer has already tried to plug it in numerous times, so any damage that is going to be done has already been done. But in any case, we're going to take the back cover on this and do some quick stabbing first to see what we're up against. Yeah, last gaming laptop we looked at was a high side short into the CPU and a dead end. That was an Acer as well. However, hopefully this one will be different. So let's get these screws out and see if we've actually got something worth fixing here. That's a lot of dust. Gross. Right, let's disconnect the battery. So we've got our CPU and we've got the power stages are going to be under here on this plate section. Likewise, there's the power stages for the GPU under that plate. So both of these power areas will have the main power rail going into them. And as is the case with Acers, they tend to have a couple of electrolytic caps right next door. So these big 33 microfarad 25 volt capacitors are going to be sitting on the main power rail. So let's check what they're up to. I'll put the multimeter into resistance mode and I'm going to put the black probe on the ground side of one of these caps and let's check the main rail. Okay. That's 11.7 kilo ohms, and if I just release and apply again, yep, it's jumped up into the mega ohms range because those capacitors have now charged a little bit. Alright, it's not a main rail short then. Let's check, so the DC jack is right here. Let's just check if we've got a short across the DC jack. Nope. Okay, I'm going to go around and just start stabbing things. So I'm going to look for big capacitors and inductors. So looking for capacitors that are going to be on just power rails in general. And inductors which will be just secondary power rails. So I'm looking for zeros basically. Nothing there. This capacitor has zero resistance on it. Okay, we've got something. What about this guy over here? Nope. Over here? Nope. Over here? Nope. Okay. This guy, what are you? Right, let's zoom on. I'm going to pull the microscope in and I'm just going to have a quick look at that area. So this inductor here, when I measured the output there, we were seeing 0 ohms. Yeah, or well, 0.68 ohms. What is that? Can we see what this is doing? It's labeled, but we can't see what's actually happening there. This could be the 5 or the 3.3 volt regulator. My guess is it's the 5 because it looks a bit bigger than the other ones. So we can do a little bit of detective work just at a glance here. We've got, oh yeah, I mean it's pretty obvious what is what when you actually look at them. So yeah, so we've got a regulator chip, and it's got ground here. It's got an input coming in the top here. And then it's got an output going into the inductor, which then goes through. And then this solder blob is a jumper, and that just bridges it onto its actual output. So we could clear this jumper and find out if the short is on the rail or the regulator. Then again over here, we've got another regulator, and we've got a ground plane. We've got the power input, and then we've got the output, which goes through an inductor, and then another jumper onto the final output. And then this one is at 1.7K. So yeah, that's got high resistance on it. All right, so what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to pop the memory modules out and see if we've got a board number on the top. No. And huzzah! It's an LA L191P. So let's see if we can get a schematic for this, because then we can have a look. As I say, that's probably the 5-volt regulator is my guess, but let's get a schematic so we can get more information, and we'll take a closer look at this. I'm going to roll the intro while I look that up, so I'll see you guys after the cut. So that inductor is PL501. So PL501 takes us down to here. Zoom, enhance. So, well, zoom out a little bit. So you can see we've got two regulators on this page, and in a surprise to no one, one of them's the 3-volt rail and the other is the 5-volt rail. They're both basically identical except for the fact that they've been configured to two different voltages. And as I predicted, it is the 5-volt rail that we have a problem on. So the first thing we want to know is the problem out on the 5-volt rail itself, or is the problem with the regulator? So we can very easily check this. Let's swing the microscope back in. And what I'll do is I'm going to turn on the soldering iron, and we're going to just wick up that jumper solder blob, and that will disconnect the rail from the inductor, and then we can see what side the short is on. Damn it, I forgot to switch to the microscope view. I've just desoldered the blob that was on there, and as you can see, with that solder blob removed, we've got this little sawtooth pattern on the pads now. So we've got the regulator coming up to here, and then that solder blob jumpers it over to the actual 5-volt rail, which goes into the board, probably to the other side, and then goes off to wherever the 5-volt rail is needed. So now, if I check the resistance to ground on this side, there's our 0.7 ohm short, and if I check the other side, there is no short at all. So this tells me that the short is on the regulator side, not on the rail side. So if we go back to the schematic, what we have here is the output here going to the 5-volt rail, and then it goes through this jumper here, and we've just detached this jumper, which is in line. So what we've now determined is that our fault is somewhere on this section here. So what I might do, I guess I'll just stab it and see if it's one of those capacitors. But first, let's just look real close at those capacitors. What do you think, folks? Is that a crack? Could be. I'm tempted to take a couple of pot shots at that before I go to the trouble of setting up for injection. I think I'm going to do that. I'll wet the joints with some fresh solder. And I'm going to get that guy in the middle because, I don't know, that looks like it might be a crack. So I'm going to try my luck. Okay, right, so let's go on to a ground pin. Let's see if our short circuit has disappeared first. It hasn't. Okay, it was neither of those two then. Waste of time. Right, am I going to keep taking pot shots, or am I going to inject? I think we'll inject. I'll put those two back on the board because those didn't need to come off. If you get into a situation where you're just randomly taking stuff off the board, my strong recommendation is to be putting things back as you go. Alright, so those capacitors were a bust. I'm going to go ahead and inject power. So let's go through the checklist. Why are we injecting power? We have a short circuit and we don't know where the shorted component is. Do we know where we're going to inject power? Yes, we're going to inject directly onto the 5-volt regulator because that is the area that is reading low resistance that should not be low resistance. Do we know if we're going to damage anything? No, we're not going to damage anything because we've isolated the 5-volt rail itself. So the rest of the 5-volt rail will not see any of this voltage. And the main power rail, that's not shorted, so it's not going to go back there either. And even if it did, the main power rail will quite happily cope with a volt going into it. So no problems there either. So the only thing that will be damaged by this is the component that is already dead and shorting us to ground. So I've set my power supply to 1 volt and 3 amps. And I shall now grab my probes. Right, and let's go ahead and inject onto that regulator there. It helps if I turn the power supply on. And let's go ahead and inject onto that regulator. There. Ah. It is one of those capacitors. Hold on a moment. Let's get the macro lens out. I'm sure that was the one that I just took off. Let's look closely. No. Really? It's that one? That's the only one that I didn't remove. Hold on a moment. I thought that one was on. I thought that was after the jumper. Oh no! Yeah, I punked myself. Okay, I can't believe it. Fine. So when I took off those capacitors, I took off these two, but I didn't take off this one because I thought it was bridging over to here. But when you look, you can actually see. You can actually see the separation there. It does go up onto this area. So the only one I didn't remove was the faulty one. Okay, fine. Happy days, it's a capacitor. Easy win. Well, I say easy win. It's not a main rail short. For once. It's the 5-volt rail instead. It's basically the same thing on a different rail. Right, let's rip that thing off. There's a special treat. You guys can actually see what's happening this time. Right, and I'm going to have to take one of those other ones back off again so I can measure it. So, moving down to our two dudes here. Right, that guy was the good one. And let's go to capacitance mode. And in shock to known, it's a 22 microfarad. And this guy here is our shorted capacitor. Cool. All right, so you go on the floor. You will go back on the board. And the other one gets a shiny new capacitor. Oop. Actually, move on. Fuse. God, this power plane is, yeah. Right, my replacement cap is a little bit big. These are 0604s and I'm putting on an 0805, but that's okay, it'll fit. It will make it legal. And I'm just going to do some quick continuity checks just to make sure that that's all on. So from ground to ground, yeah, that's on. And from power to power, yep, that's also connected. And from ground to power, we are no longer shorted. Excellent. I'll just touch that up with the big iron just to tidy up the edges. Right, and finally, what I should have done before I just cleaned all of that up is we need to put our jumper blob back on. These are surprisingly awkward, by the way. So, yeah. There we go. If you actually use a lot of flux there, it will just not blob up because it's not supposed to. So while that doesn't look like a very pretty blob, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead because I know if I try and tidy that up, I'll start fighting it. Okay, let's take this off. I'll do the thermal paste while I'm here. The thermal paste is probably okay on this one because I don't think it's old enough for the thermal paste to be mega cooked. But on the other hand, we've got a lot of dust on these fans, which means it's probably been running hot. So yeah, it will have better thermal paste on it that has probably lasted. Better thermal paste than the average laptop. But yeah, we've got a lot of dust on here, so it's probably been running hot, and that means the thermal paste is probably cooked, so yeah. And our survey says... yeah, it's kind of dry if I'm honest. GPU is okay, but it'll benefit from new stuff. This is why I hate taking off heatsinks like this unless I actually have to. Alright. I'm going to quickly give these fans a blowout with the air duster. Just using MX4 for this, which is fine. Go. And now if I'm lucky, all of the tiny little thermal pads won't drop off when I flip this over. I think we're good. Not tightening these down yet, I'm just putting them in just so it's sitting square. There we go. And because now I've got to thread some cables through, and I probably needed to do that before I put it down flat, so I'm not going to commit just in case. Cool. Right, while I put these screws in, let's ask ourselves, let's summarize. So what happened? We had a short circuit on the 5-volt rail, and I discovered that during just the initial stabbing phase. So I had my multimeter in resistance mode. I started out by checking the main power rail on the main capacitors, didn't see any short circuits. So then I started probing all of the inductors, all of the grey squares, looking for any of them that were reading as 0. You'll see various resistances there, and you kind of need to be really experienced to know exactly what the resistances of each one would be. Like there's no doubt there are folks in the comments section that would be able to identify which one is which at a glance. I'm not that experienced, although I can take an educated guess. However, at the very least, none of them should be reading 0. So as soon as we came across a large one that was reading as 0 ohms resistance, that's how we knew that there was something up there. And then on closer inspection, we had a jumper that was separating the regulator from the actual rail, so we were able to isolate the regulator and establish that the regulator was where the fault was, not the rail itself. So that meant that we were narrowed down to a pretty small area of the motherboard where our fault could actually be. So at that, I could have kept taking capacitors off and just guessing, and there were, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 capacitors on the output there, and there's a couple on the input. So there's maybe 6 or 7 capacitors. Could have just kept taking them off until I ran out of capacitors, and then assumed it was the regulator itself. However, for the sake of the video, we went for the injection, and that revealed that one of the capacitors that I didn't look at was the culprit. Good, everything is plugged in, so I'm going to connect the battery. And then I'm going to connect the charger, and we should get a charge light. I'll give these fans a brush with the toothbrush as well. The air duster gets the clumps of dust off, but it doesn't take off the surface. Let's see. I will commit and put the back cover on, just because then I can flip the laptop over properly. I am 99% certain that it's going to be okay, so I'll take that bet. Right, so DC jack is on the back, and then we've got a charge light there, so that's where we're looking for a light to appear. And there's our charge light. It's beautiful. And power. We've got a power LED, and the keyboard is lit up. Because I disconnected the main battery, it's probably done a BIOS reset. So, yeah, it's turned itself off and on again. So that's probably going to take 1 or 2 reboots to post while it RAM trains. There we go. One Acer logo, and it's booting Windows. Thank you everyone for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And as always, thank you all to my channel supporters. So my patrons, my channel members, and my Twitch subscribers as well. See you all in the next one. Bye.